Okay, we're going to do some Unit 8 today, AURETR137. That actual unit has been superseded with an updated unit, but because of the system that we have, we've got to do the older system delivery, which isn't a lot different, but it doesn't matter. And we're diagnosing complex faults in light vehicle safety systems. You know, the safety systems of the vehicle now has just gone through the roof with so many features they have. I guess it just blows my mind to think how technology has taken over now with cars. Cars are now what we call computers on wheels, with so many extra computers and different functions and different things. I mean, we've got almost autonomous cars now. We do have autonomous cars that drive by themselves, although in Australia here they're more semi-autonomous. But you can see where we're going with cars. Does it make you feel almost, how can I understand all this to be a good technician, to be able to deal with all the new technologies? So you feel a bit daunted by everything that's changing? A little bit, or not? Or you just growing with the changes and don't think too much about it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much growing with it, which is good. For me, I've gone from seeing everything mechanical now to seeing so many things that are electronically controlled now with the engine, with the body control functions, with just about every part of the car now, even the tyres. We've got tyre monitoring systems. I was talking to a Tesla owner just this week, and he was saying his tyres, he doesn't bother pumping his tyres up because his car tells him when he needs to. And the other day, whatever the pressure was, say it was 44 PSI, it got down to 42 at the time he needed to pump his tyres up, you know. So, you know, things have really developed now, and all these things are built in to make the cars safer. And the manufacturers are driven by emissions and fuel economy, but also the vehicle safety. So it's a big deal now, the vehicle safety. But it puts a whole new lot of layers of more complications for us that we have to deal with. But like I've said in the past, when we look at our wiring diagrams, we see a very complicated mess of wiring, right? But if we start to isolate what we're looking at and just have the basic area that we need to delve into and just concentrate on that, it's going to make life much simpler for us then to deal with these problems. Complicated problems are only complicated because, you know, we're daunted with so many things on the car, but if we break it down to where we need to check, and like everything in diagnostics, we eliminate what we think the problem might be, and once we eliminate that, we move on to the next section. So it's important now to have our wiring diagrams, to have our vehicle information, and to know how things to work. At AutoCare, we learned that, you know, we need to know 85%. 15% we don't need to know because we can find that out, because the 15% we don't know will be in our workshop manuals, our auto data material, and etc., right? The 85% is the basics, how things work. Once we know the basics, we apply that to each vehicle, not a lot changes. It's just how they control that changes, and that's what we don't know, and that's why we use our vehicle information. So, we'll get into this now. Now, you know, ABS brakes is also a safety device, okay? But because we've dealt with ABS in the previous unit, we won't go into ABS this time. And, you know, adaptive cruise control, all that is tied up with traction control, stability control, all that is to do with safety. But we're going to build on other things that we haven't talked about, such as, you know, safety is the foremost in the minds of automotive manufacturers. So safety also sells cars for the manufacturer. But not only does it sell cars, often they will invent some sort of safety factor into the car. But before long, that might be in some of the high-end cars that we see these safety things built into these newer modern cars. But as time moves on, we start to find becomes all cars take it on board. I guess the insurance companies are pushing it. I guess you know, everyone's pushing for a safer environment for cars. And once the technology is proven, we start to see it wind out with all the vehicles. So we see it evolving. Evolution, but it all involves, and we continue to see improvements. Many safety features are now available as standard equipment, just as I was saying. Some of these standard features include side impact barriers. So the doors are set up to protect us as we have a collision on the side with impact reinforcement in the doors. What's a crumble zone? You know what a crumble zone is?
Crumple zone.
Never heard of a crumble zone? Do you know what a crumble zone is?
It has to do something with the accident.
It's to do with when you have an accident, yes?
Yeah, I think it's zone like it's got stages, 1, 2, and 3, sort of thing.
Yeah, you're probably getting there.
Yeah.
They definitely have them on the front of the car and the rear of the car. And the areas that will actually take the force of the accident and crumble in that, and to absorb, like a shock absorb a little bit of the impact that happens when you have an accident. So you have a weakness in the body of the car, so it will crumble as the accident happens. And that is sort of to slow down the impact on us and the occupants in the car, okay? So that's a crumble zone. Seatbelts and pre-tensioners. So seatbelts have, and we'll talk about it more, but they have what's called pre-tensioners that pull down when you have an accident, and they actually pull you tight so you don't go forward as much, okay, when you have an accident. I mean, even seatbelts have been put in cars back in the early days as a safety for the occupants in the car. There was a big push against having seatbelts with the public when seatbelts first came on. So much so that some cars put seatbelts in as an option, and the manufacturers, or not the manufacturers, but the dealerships were asked by the buyers to remove the seatbelts. We don't want seatbelts. They didn't want to have seatbelts. And it was only, I guess it was in the 60s, so long before you were born, but in the 60s it became mandatory and law that we had to wear seatbelts. And even today, I mean, they've got these cameras now to take pictures because people are defying the law by not wearing seatbelts. But they've proven that seatbelts definitely reduce injuries in accidents. So yeah, they're a benefit. We talked about anti-lock brakes, which is ABS brakes and traction control, stability control. But what we're going to be talking about a lot today is SRS airbags. What's SRS mean or stand for?
Something, a restraint system.
Yeah, it's a supplementary restraint system, which is like your seat belts, your airbags, everything tied in together, okay? Right. We've got two types of vehicle safety things. One's called an active system and one's called a passive system. So the difference between the two, okay? In an active system, okay, the system safety features that help to prevent an accident from happening, okay? So these are things. We've got even adaptive cruise control. It will slow you down when you're in traffic, so that's pretty much a safety feature to help with your driving to prevent accidents. Lane departure warning, so that you don't cross over lanes. Sometimes it's just a beep, beep, beep. That's what it's in my Hilux. Other times it will actually give a bit of a jerk on the steering wheel as well as a beep. My Camry hybrid I used to have 2020 model, it would do that. And then we have also almost like the Teslas, for example. You don't go to the steering wheel and it'll stay in the lane because it keeps the car steering in the lane unless you use your indicator to change. And that's almost getting up to a semi-autonomous vehicle driving itself. Passive. Passives are systems that operate automatically. Airbags. Your airbags are part of the passives. These are things that are added to the car to try and prevent accidents. These are things that are in the car to try and to help you, when you do have an accident, that you don't get so badly injured, okay? So passive is your operation of your airbags, your seat belts, and so on, okay? So please, correct me there. Okay, passive seatbelt electric motors to move to your shoulders. So they have seatbelts that actually, in the old days, they used to move into place for locking when you hop in the car, which I didn't see in Australia. So I don't think they ever came out in Australia, but in America they did. Most vehicles have two active belt joint together, single point. So if you look at the anchor points, if you look at the seat belt, where it goes, the lap seat belt, you've sort of got a lap belt that bolts down to one anchor point, but it's over your lap and it's over your shoulder as one point, you know what I mean? So we need to check those anchor points, that they're secure, the bolts are tight, that everything's moving properly. Sometimes seat belts get caught, that there's no pivoting, and we've got to make sure that nothing's jamming them up, things like that. Look inside the buckle. Sometimes if the buckle doesn't clip in, you might have something dropped in, a hairpin or a who knows what, a coin. It's just a matter of pulling out the thing and getting the whatever's in there out of the buckle, okay? But that can be a problem. Sometimes those buckles fail and you've got to replace them, of course. There we go. It's a video.
Does this ever happen to you?
This lightweight, life-saving device is just too hard to put on.
Well, look no further than the late 1980s. Believe it or not, seatbelts were not always fashionable, especially the closer and closer you get to their original conception. Some late 1980s and early 1990s cars had a remedy for these issues: to automate them. They didn't stick around for long, and they never really caught on. Why was that? Well, let's talk about it. While the seatbelt itself was first pioneered in the late 1800s by George Cayley for use in his glider, Dr. C. Hunter Sheldon is credited with the idea of retractable seatbelts in automobiles, which he came up with in 1946. Dr. Sheldon was a neurosurgeon in Pasadena, California, and noticed the massive amount of patients he had entering his practice with head injuries from motor collisions. Dr. Sheldon also proposed recessed steering wheels, reinforced roofs, roll bars, automatic door locks, and even an early concept of an airbag. But maybe that's for another video. Nash was the first company to offer belts in their vehicles in 1949. They were installed in approximately 40,000 cars, of which approximately 39,000 customers asked the dealers to remove them before purchase. No one wanted seatbelts. Ford offered them 6 years later in 1955, but only 2% of buyers actually purchased the seatbelts. Just like Nash had learned half a decade earlier, no one wanted them. Saab was the first company to make safety belts standard equipment in their 1958 Saab GT 750. However, these were all lap belts. The more modern three-point belts were patented in June of 1955 by Americans Roger W. Griswold and Hugh DeHaven. Here are the patent documents that look less like a monumental innovation and more like diagrams from a murder mystery podcast. Creepy. Volvo was also working on a similar design. A Swedish electric utility company by the name of Vattenfall did a study on their workplace injuries. Their survey found that most of the injuries were caused on the road between work sites in car accidents. Two engineers at Vattenfall developed a three-point seatbelt and presented their work to Volvo. Volvo loved the idea and made it a standard feature in their cars for the 1959 model year with the help of Niels Bohlin. The inventors then investigated 28,000 automobile accidents under 60 miles an hour with both no seatbelts and their new three-point belts. Their findings were that as long as the passenger compartment remained intact, not a single accident was fatal with the three-point belt. This could not be said about the lack of belts in the vehicle. The cherry on top of all this, Volvo allowed other manufacturers to use their patent for free so that all vehicles could have this new life-saving technology. Victoria, Australia was the first place to make a law requiring seatbelt use for the front driver and passenger in 1970, following a study of police vehicles fitted with belts resulting in fewer officer injuries. The United States followed in the 1980s, but it wasn't met without pushback. Interestingly, the hot rod community loved the idea of belts for their homemade sleds, often utilizing airplane belts like this 1966 Ford Mustang I reviewed. But in the eyes of the public, no. No one wanted to wear their seatbelt. It was uncomfortable, It was strange, and people felt as though it was their own choice whether they wear it or not. In protests, motorists would cut their seatbelts out of their cars or even challenge the laws in court. Take a look at the back of the Mazda RX-7 brochure. Interesting. But when does the power mechanism come into play? Well, Volkswagen is credited to having the first automatic seatbelt in their 1975 Volkswagen Golf. The Carter administration set a deadline for 1983, saying that every vehicle must have automated seatbelts or airbags by this year. This oncoming law jump-started multiple manufacturers to produce something to comply. Toyota introduced automatic seatbelts in the 1981 Toyota Cressida. However, by the time they released the vehicle, the Reagan administration had taken off completely. But the belts were already in motion. What was originally meant to be the future of safety soon became a gimmick when they were no longer required like they were told they would be. I mean, look at them. They're so fun. They became a staple for the late 80s and early 90s. What you're seeing now is a 1991 Nissan 240SX. But what happened to them? Well, there are a few reasons that we no longer see automatic seatbelts in cars. With the introduction of dual airbags in the 1990s and the federal law requiring them in 1997, there wasn't much of a need for the power belts. The airbags were safer and easier. But there was another bigger issue. They broke. Just like the pop-up headlights we talked about last video, anything motorized will break. Things gunk up the track and the slide can get jammed. When that happens, you no longer have a seatbelt, which is a huge problem. Mazda still has a factory recall on their power seatbelts for the Mazda RX-7, where still, to this day, you can go and get them serviced for free when they inevitably fail at your local Mazda dealer. So, that's it. Companies were told that they needed to create these automatic seatbelts to help the public comply with the new law. But then, overnight, they were no longer required, and the technology hung around for about a decade, but fizzled out because of mechanical failure and advancements in other tech. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys have been enjoying my monthly video essay series on some 80s car quirks. I talked about 55-mile-an-hour speedometers, I talked about quartz clocks, I talked about pop-up headlights, as well as third brake lights, of which you can see at the end of this video and watch at your own discretion. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.
In my PowerPoint that I was given, I thought I'd better find out, and I found that video, so, yeah.
Some convertible cars I've
Yeah.
seen,
Yes.
BMWs especially.
Yes.
So as soon as you sit, the seatbelt comes from the back and it gives you the seatbelt.
Yeah, I've
So
seen
you just
those.
have to
I
plug
have
it back
seen that.
and it goes back again.
I have seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think which car I saw it on, but yeah, I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
but I saw it on a BMW,
Yeah.
a convertible.
I don't know whether it could have been BMW actually, yeah.
Mm.
I think you're right. Anyhow, I don't think we'll ever see any of those because we never had them in
Yeah.
Australia to my knowledge. So,
Even this, now the seatbelts that we are using, they're very sensitive. So as soon as you brake, it locks.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes
That's
if you're pulling it, it won't
I
come.
like. And that's what we'll learn later, that when we road test the car to check the seatbelts, we need to drive it maybe, I don't know, 10 or so kilometres an hour and just brake and make sure they lock.
Mm.
But yeah. So, pretensioners, right? They take up the slack if you have an accident. The inertia retractors prevent movement when there is a sudden pull, as you just talked about. So you know all that. Again, you got this little wobbly thing. You can't put one tractable seatbelt that fits all cars. They're all a little bit different because of the way that they balance and the angles they have them on. So yeah, sometimes people have put seatbelts in that aren't compliant because they're not really designed for that particular car. So you really have to get the right seatbelts to be safe. You can't repair a seatbelt, okay? You can't pull it apart and repair it. Maybe you can clean it, that's about as much as you can do, but you can't really, if something's not working properly, end of story, you've got to replace it. The liability as a technician, if we are fixing up someone's seatbelt, if we just, do something and pull it apart and they have an accident and the seatbelt doesn't lock, everything will fall back on us. So yeah, it's not worth the mucking around. Some vehicles use electric pyrotech tensioners, like a firework type thing that explodes to actually pull them down when they have an accident. These are used to pull the seatbelt in during a collision. This keeps the passenger tight against the seat, obviously. There are electric ones. I think the pyrotechnic ones are more common, I think.
Even wearing seatbelts while sitting at the back is mandatory right now, isn't it?
It is, yeah. When I go to India, no one wears seatbelts. I have a feeling the laws change that they're supposed to, but they don't.
You know, I'll tell you a story. In Fiji, I don't know if everyone knows.
Yes.
When I came to Australia, some drivers, they were not wearing seatbelts. You know what police used to do? They used to write it with a panel pen on a seatbelt. Please wear your seatbelt.
Oh, you mean the police, bro?
Yeah, police. Those police were writing on the seatbelt.
Yeah.
Please wear your seatbelts.
Oh, really?
In Fiji, yeah, because they were
Fiji.
Fiji,
okay.
yeah.
I thought you meant here.
Yeah, recently it was happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. But no, it's mandatory that we have seatbelts. I think most cars in India don't even have seatbelts in the rear.
Yeah.
And have you been to India?
3 times.
You see how they drive in India?
Yep.
You want to put a seatbelt on?
No.
They drive crazy.
Whenever I was in India, I made sure all my family had a seatbelt on.
Good.
And everyone had a look, and it was a bit weird for them, like people, like we had a seatbelt on, and everyone was looking, these people are too paranoid or something. I go like that.
But you know,
Safety's first.
when I was in India, we were driven from one of the airports where we were going, and we're driving, and everyone was blasting their horns, and every horn, the way you toot the horn means something. You want to overtake or give me room to pass or whatever. But we were overtaking cars. Cars are coming towards us, and we're in the middle of cars coming towards us, and the car we're overtaking, and there's a cow in the middle of the road. Oh my goodness. But somehow everyone missed everyone, and we kept going, but yeah. All right, we're going to have a look at these pre-tensioners.
The device that tightens a seatbelt during a crash is called a seatbelt pre-tensioner. There are a number of different types of pre-tensioners on the market. The most common type today is the pyrotechnic. In this system, when the central processor detects a crash, it sends an electronic signal to the pre-tensioner. The spark created from this signal detonates gas within the chamber. This explosion moves a piston that pulls on a steel cable, causing the belt to tighten by approximately 4 inches. This design is quick enough that the belt will actually tighten before the occupant has moved forward in the seat during a crash, pulling in on the belt and helping move a passenger into an optimum position. Mechanical systems use an inertial wheel with a pendulum to lock the belt in place during sudden deceleration. Once triggered, a ratchet keeps the seatbelt from loosening. If you've ever tried to pull on your seatbelt for more slack, only to have it lock unexpectedly, this is likely a mechanical pre-tensioner. In addition to pre-tensioners and airbags, rip stitching is often used on seatbelts as another safety feature. During a collision, rip stitching can reduce the load transmitted through the belt to the occupant by gradually tearing once the pre-tensioners pull the seatbelt tight. This allows the occupant to move forward into the airbag at a more controlled rate, thus reducing injuries. Once this stitching is ripped, the seatbelts must be replaced. You'll often find warning labels inside the fold that will be revealed during a crash. The label will remind you to replace the belt.
I didn't know that.
It's all about safety. You don't realise the science that goes in, do you? And it makes sense, doesn't it? They slow you down for your forward movement momentarily till the airbag's fully depleted, and then the stitching breaks because of the force that you're under. So yeah, pretty smart, eh? And things to look at, if you're looking at someone...
The device that tightens a seat.
And if you're looking at somebody's seatbelt to inspect it, and you see that stitching broken, you've got to replace it. It's probably been an accident and no one's replaced it. So yeah. So all this is good education. So you know a bit more when you're looking at your customers' cars, especially doing roadworthies and inspections. So all modern vehicles use a reminder chime. They're annoying, aren't they, when you haven't got a seatbelt on? The other day, I had to take my Hilux, I was putting a reverse camera in, and I pulled the left side seat right out so I could get to the wiring under the dash and that. I was having trouble getting the camera to work. And so I drove the car down to the place that it was one of the stereo shop places that supplied the kit to me. I drove down there just to get some advice, and all the way the thing was going beep, 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 because the seat was out, and knew it was out, and it just kept chiming. It was so annoying, but I had no choice. I mean, I couldn't put the seat in. Once the seatbelt is fastened, the signal is set to the indicator module. If the seatbelt remains unfastened, an alert will sound. The sensor in the seatbelt detects an occupant. So obviously my seat, there's a pressure sensor, so when you sit in it, it knows you need to put a seatbelt on. And obviously by disconnecting it, it must have been showing that. Yeah.
And it's very sensitive. As soon as you put something on it,
and it's annoying.
It senses. It senses.
I know. Yeah. But anyhow. So, pay special attention to where the webbing contacts maximum strength points. So wherever that seatbelt is stitched up and all that, check that. Also check you don't see it now, but in the earlier seatbelts, they used to fray very easily over time.
Yeah.
And I don't see that so much now with modern cars, but check that there's no webbing that's fraying, and that there's nothing stuck in the retractor, no dirt or foreign material in the webbing. And never bleach or dye a seatbelt. I don't know who would want to bleach or dye. I guess if you bought a second-hand one and want to change the colour, but they say don't do that. For whatever reason, you're not to. Again, things to look out for. I think you're all aware of those sort of things. They discolour sometimes in age in those areas. That's probably a telltale sign they're getting old.
So can you change the colour of your seatbelt if someone can do it?
Only if the manufacturer's done it beforehand. They've changed the colour.
Because I remember going to AURETR. So AURETR had this booth where they did the seatbelts. So say you give them your vehicle detail and everything, so they'll make a seatbelt for you.
Oh yeah, well that's different.
Whatever colour you want.
They will manufacture it in accordance to the safety requirements and have the colour that's needed.
Yeah.
They probably buy different colour webbing, I'd say, so it's already made with that colour, I imagine.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I doubt that they would actually do any dyeing themselves. But yeah, we can't.
Yeah, no, seatbelt already they come in the colour, so they.
That's right. So, I mean, there's not that many different coloured seatbelts. I think there's obviously you got your black is a common one, the light coloured ones, the creamy coloured ones.
Yeah.
I think I've seen red ones before.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of colours actually.
I don't have much notice the colours, I guess. So insert your seatbelt until it clicks and the click is heard. Obviously, I guess we do that subconsciously, but if we do a roadworthy, I always used to put the buckles in each one to make sure they all lock in and click in properly. And quickly pull on the webbing to ensure it locks, but obviously some seatbelts you need to drive it, as we talked about before, and brake heavily. And replace the assembly if it fails to latch up. We used to do Hertz cars, and often we'd have problems with seatbelts. Sometimes it's just a matter of something being caught into the buckle, but other times you just have to replace the buckle. Occasionally you have to replace the seatbelt for problems. Okay. Lap belt retractors should lock once the belt is fully out. Vehicle sensitivity reactors tested by the braking test, as I said, so we drive about 8 to 13 kilometres an hour and stop quickly. Most retractors are not interchangeable, meaning you can't put your left one to your right or back one to your front. They're specific for where they are.
I think they also, I think they have a pendulum or something, because if you go to certain degrees sideways, it will lock it.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, they usually have an L or an R on them, so you don't mix them up from side to side. Okay. So I always look at the anchor points and the bolts and make sure everything's clean.
Yeah.
And,
Mark?
yes. Oh yeah, look at that. I'll show the video. Quite a few different colours, eh?
Oh yeah.
Cool. Okay. You've got to make sure you
This
tension
looks like a hose fryer.
tension the anchor bolts if you ever pull them off. Don't just use a rattle gun to do them up.
Yeah.
Okay. Inspect the metal. I mean, we don't see rust in cars. We used to see a lot of rust in cars. But just make sure it's nice and clean and there's not anything structurally wrong with where the anchor point is. In the early days, we used to put anchor points in cars, particularly child restraints, because in the early days, a lot of the older cars never had provision for child restraints. So we used to have an engineer to do it, to make a plan to put them in that would sign off on it to say that we had enough reinforcement for those anchor points. So, you've got to have the right amount of metal. Inspect and test the rear seatbelt restraints in the same way as you do the fronts, which stands to reason. Okay. Warning lights should come on when the key is turned on, obviously, on the on position. Should also be a warning chime if you start to drive off without a seatbelt, so that's something to check when you're doing a roadwork and that works. And if it's not, there could be a blown fuse. It's easy to pull a fuse out if you're working on a car and you're getting annoyed by the chime because you have the door open and the key ignition on. Just pull the fuse out, it's the simplest way. But a fuse could also be blown, being the cause of those safety warning devices not telling the driver what they should be telling them. Obviously, you've got to replace the damaged seatbelt, okay? You don't just fix it, as I said before. And we've already covered, checking the edges. Well, maybe we haven't covered that. Make sure there's no sharp edges when the seatbelt pulls out that can rub on the seatbelt.
What are seatbelts made of? They're so strong.
They are strong. I've never been asked that question. There's some sort of material, obviously.
Not silk.
No, they're not silk, that's for sure. Silk wouldn't be that strong enough.
Yeah, because...
Something you can look it up, eh? Good question. We have so many different types of fabrics around these days, but seatbelts are very strong. They have to be, don't they? Don't attempt to repair the seatbelt. Tighten all anchor bolts to specifications.
100% polyester.
Polyester, there you go.
Plastic.
All right, we have a question. Okay, so technician A says a faulty seatbelt retractor should be disassembled, inspected, and repaired. Technician B says a faulty retractor should be replaced. Who's correct?
B.
B.
B. You've been listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, good on you.
Never ever.
They disassemble.
Yeah,
Never ever repair a seatbelt.
that's right.
Replace.
That's right. That's right. So just check what our next slide is. I think we're moving into airbags. So let's stop for a minute. We're on airbags next.